Our nation's growth is dependent upon the citizens that sit on council and planning commissions. If they vote yes, the proposal becomes a real development. A no vote means the developer's time and money invested vanishes. The zoning and subdivision ordinance provides the guidance that commissions and councils abide by. But are they the right rules to assure or encourage the best growth? Some of the regulations guidance comes from standards set by state or federal regulations that are intended to keep us safe. However, some, if not most, of the regulations are based upon nothing other than emotional consensus. Many of today's regulations are simply boilerplated from city to city over decades and decades. Almost every ordinance starts out with a purpose and or intent, and the wording that follows it exists to make sure they serve the purpose of the regulations. The most common wording is extremely vague, as seen here. I've seen ordinances as far back as the early 1930s with identical language. This is an example of a good purpose and intent. It describes in far more detail things that could help the city grow and redevelop better. In every case I've seen a great purpose and intent, the regulations that follow rarely addresses any of the goals and instead just provides the most minimal dimensional standards. This minimums-based approach to growth encourages the consultants to squeeze every unit or commercial square footage into the site without regard to anything else. The result is that city after city, the council and planning commissions blame the developer for bland proposals. Yet the developer almost never designs their projects. It's a civil engineer, surveyor, or architect that's following the city's minimums. In turn, it encourages mundane development through the set of minimum standards. In other words, a minimum dimension will be interpreted as an absolute dimension. Instead of blaming the developer, city stakeholders, the mayor, staff, commission, and council should be looking onto their own regulations as the culprit. You see, these regulations set the blueprint for others to follow. As bad as our regulatory system is, all is needed to think differently and improve upon the existing system. What if instead of a minimums-based approach, cities rewarded developers that went above and beyond the city minimum standards? These new ways to think about rewriting existing regulations are introduced in Proverbia Chapter 12. Development submittal requirements of a city are essentially identical to that of a half a century ago, which were identical to the half century before that, and a half a century before then. Why do submittals still require the identical information as if we are still drawing on parchment by hand in black and white? For the past 3 decades, every plan we design has every improvement, every home, walk, driveway, everything needed to see what will be built, not for the city council and commission, but for our developer clients to understand what we are proposing. For the past 2 decades, we've been including the precision spatial data of the impact of every man-made element we propose on the site. For the past decade, every plan we design also includes interactive 3D, and for the past 5 years, we have presented in immersive VR at city and council planning commission meetings. The technologies and techniques we developed allowed us to deliver this information without extra charge and present to cities with data far beyond the scope of what they require for submittals. Yet city after city submittal requirements remain in vintage mode, with planning commissions and council clueless as to what they're actually approving. The fact is, the only material change in the way city council meetings of 1960 and 2020 is that 60 years ago an overhead projector was used to communicate. Today it's via a large screen and PowerPoint. Cities have the power, they're just not using it. Remaining status quo is easy, but it's certainly not cheap. Without updating the regulations and how public meetings are held with visualization and virtualization to make proper decisions, nothing will change. However, the worst part is cities will continue to be built with millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of needless extra infrastructure. The Guidance contained in these sessions should be how regulations are written to provide the logic and advantages of alternate ways to grow beyond and above the minimums. They should convey the financial benefits to the submitter, but our current regulations aren't written that way. But they could be if planners and their consultants think differently and adopt better technology. Keep in mind, the city can be a top-down approach, and any improvements in the economics of growth also improves the submitter's economics. This economic improvement is passed down to the taxpayers, the citizens and business owners. In other words, ultimately, you and your family.